Hello and welcome and thanks for tuning in to this webinar live from the Xebia studio in Hilversum. And today we're going to talk about security. And we're going to talk about security and ways that it doesn't have to be painful. I'm Walter, I will be your host for today. And if you have any questions, feel free to drop them in the live chat in the YouTube interface. I'll be keeping an eye out and addressing them with the experts that join me here at the table. Because security is really relevant in this day and age, because cloud is nothing more than someone else's computer. Or isn't it? Wilfred.
Absolutely.
Thanks for joining.
Thanks for having me.
You're a security specialist at Hunt and Hackett.
Yes.
What's your background? And tell me a little bit about what Hunt and Hackett does.
At Hunt and Hackett, we are in the core and managed detection and response services provider. We do deliver some services around that, but our core is managed detection and response, which we deliver from our SOC. My role within Hunt and Hackett is a security expert, which is partly performing gap assessments with our customers, but also the solution engineering part of our MDR solution. If an organization is interested in our service, I'll check with them and see how we can fit our solution in the best way, their environment in our solution. And about my background, I've been I'm a year now with Hunt and Hackett, and I once started as a SOC analyst with Fox, so I also have the hands-on expertise within a security operating center.
Great, thanks for the introduction. And for people watching this webinar, I also have a challenge for you, and that's to find most abbreviations during the session. I already spotted two, MDR and SOC. Wilfred, what does it stand for?
Yeah, MDR stands for Managed Detection and Response. So it's a managed service where the provider does detection services, so they look at the systems in your environment to see if there are anomalies and if those could indicate an attack on your systems.
Right.
And the response part, so you also want to respond, you can do that actively, so automate the response, or have the digital fireman get in and help you with solution for the incident. And SOC is there where all the analysts are working on the alerts, doing the triage, escalating incidents. So that's more where all the people are delivering the service.
Great.
Yeah.
All right, thanks for clarifying that. And you're not alone today, because at the other end of the table, there's two other security experts, Sven de Bruin and Jorge Liauw. Calo. Guys, thanks for joining.
Thank you. Great for having us.
Yeah. To start with you, Sven, could you give a quick introduction of yourself and your company?
Sure. I'm Sven de Bruin. I'm a cybersecurity specialist. I've been in security for 10 plus years. And I work at Xebia. And Xebia is a professional service company that focuses on 5 pillars: data, software development, cloud, what do we have more?
Transformation,
and
data.
Microsoft services. Yeah. So, and that's why I'm sitting here.
Great, thanks for joining. And on your left side, we have Jorge.
Yeah, hello. My name is Jorge Liauw Calo. I work now 2.5 years at Xebia as a Google Cloud security engineer, architect. So helping customers actually design and build secure solutions on the cloud. So making sure that they can move to the cloud with confidence.
Great, and you guys came up with quite a captivating title for this webinar, Security and Painful. Tell me a bit more, why can security be painful? What do you come across in your practice, Wilfred?
Yeah, I think there are multiple reasons why security can be painful, but the one I encounter the most is a translation from more the operational side of security to management, the board of directors. So being the bridge between operations and eventually making a translation to business risk.
Mm-hmm.
I think that's a challenge for most organizations, which could make security sometimes painful.
Yeah, because the business simply doesn't understand security.
Yeah, they don't see it as much as a risk as it is. So it also has to do with risk perception. Is the risk? How big is the risk? So I think really being the bridge between operation and the and board of directors could make it a lot easier, security.
Yeah. What do you come across, Sven?
Well, a lot of times we see a lot of engineers trying to secure their platforms, their infrastructure and such, but they don't have the clear requirements to what they need to look for or what they need to implement it for. So it's unclear what they're protecting and to what measurements. And also making sure that the board of directors, as you already said, understands what the risks are and why they're important. So bridging that gap, because then the problem is it costs money, right? It's a trade-off.
Yep.
So the board of directors in the end will decide whether to spend money on it, yes or no.
Yeah. Jorge, anything to add here?
Yeah, what I would say is security is really a top sport, right? You need to make sure you stay on top of your game. Continuous battle between the risks, the investments, how to make sure what to secure in the right manner. So I think that's what really fast moving. You need to make sure you have the right tools, right processes, services to support you if you're not able to do it yourself, right? If you don't have the right knowledge, that could be a risk on itself, right? You say, no, I can do it myself, rather hire some experts. But also looking like things for proactive monitoring and protection. And we hope to share you more on that today.
Great, and I guess that all of these pain points we will be addressing during this webinar.
Absolutely, yeah.
Yeah. Great, and then let's dive right in to the question, why security? And who wants to give this a go?
Oh yeah, thanks. Well, I think what you see most important with why do we need to do something with security, right? I think because mostly the businesses run on IT, right? I think 100% of business need to have some part of IT to work with their data or actually run their core business.
I hope so.
Yeah. So it's really work more efficient, of course. So that's really important to make sure that you secure that. But it's also a way of building trust with your customers, right? At least to maintain it, to make sure you treat their data good and protect it in right order. And of course, sometimes also that you need to comply, right, with the latest legislation. Think about GDPR or the NIS2. Wilfred will share more about that.
GDPR is already in effect. This NIS2, is that also already effective?
I think we're working on it, right, on EU level.
Not yet. They're aiming for the end of this year, but it might be the start of next year.
Okay.
And I'll dive into NIS in a second, because I want to add to this part is that the threat landscape is also growing. So we see a lot of extra threat actors popping up there because it is a business model. Lots of cyber criminals want to earn their money with the cyber attacks they perform. So I think that the threat landscape is also growing, apart from companies becoming more and more tech companies, rely on the technology. So that's the fourth one I would like to add to this.
So you see that the exposure that organizations have is increasing due to all of these factors.
You have to make security a priority these days.
And otherwise the criminals will make sure to point you out on the flaws. I think that's
exactly.
You'll learn the hard way.
Yeah. In the end, as a incentive for every company, you want to be cyber resilient, and GDPR and NIS2 can help you achieve that.
Yeah, and NIS2 has been mentioned several times now. Wilfred, what is it, and what can organizations expect from it? What's the impact?
Yeah, the NIS2 directive has the goal of making vital and important organizations within the EU more resilient against cyber attacks.
What kind of organizations are those? Because I think every organization thinks, I'm very vital.
For example, waste management is an important organization. There are two lists of those.
Health,
food supply, right?
Food supply, health, electrical, all the critical parts, and also above a certain threshold of gross market or gross turnover.
Okay.
And it's not a NIS2 webinar, so we will not dive too deep into the NIS2. But a more specific example of NIS2 is the incident reporting site. Because you have to report an incident within 24 hours to the reporting authority. If you can go to the next slide, thanks. You have to give an early warning within 24 hours. That's quite rapid. If an incident happens, you have to set up the whole incident response process, the team. But within 24 hours, you have to give an early warning to the reporting authority to give them an idea what are we dealing with. The next step is the 42-hour notification. So you'll give an instant notification with more information than the early warning.
Who do you report this to?
I'm not sure who it will be in the Netherlands.
There's a government body or something.
CSIRT will be the one.
CSIRT. Yep. Okay. Yeah, it's different per country. It's EU legislation, but you can do it in on your way in the countries.
Yeah.
But you have to report the severity of the incident, the impact, and also the indicators of compromise, which is a technical thing. So within a short time frame, you have to do a lot based on what NIS2 requires.
Right.
And within the next step, you have to deliver the final report, which you have 1 month for. You have to find the root cause. And to be able to do that, you have to have enough log data to do a proper forensic investigation. So I think the timelines here are pretty strict and not always feasible if you don't have the right tooling in place or the right service in-house. Yeah.
Right. And NIS, what does it stand for?
Network and Information Security. And it replaces the NIS 1, logically, which was made in 2018, I believe.
And it's quite interesting because we're now talking about an incident, so the problem already happened.
Right.
Yeah.
And usually we try to prevent problems from happening. So it's interesting that a certain directive is telling us how to respond on a certain problem. So they are already expecting that we will have problems.
Yeah, what do you think of that?
Well, that's a really good way of looking at it because it's really difficult to guarantee 100% security. That's something I think Jorge has something about.
Yeah, and I think it was also pretty interesting from the NIS2 that the accountability is on the board, right? When security happens, to get it more on the higher list of priorities.
Yeah. Yeah, and you mentioned an example. We're looking at a fortress here, so that
exactly.
looks quite solid, Jorge.
Chateau Gaillard, I think we have a short video about it to show here. Yeah, so what you see here is a really strong castle, 1800s. Shown here was a big battle between the French and the British armies tried to conquer this castle. So it was back and forward. And if you look at, of course, from an architecture standpoint, I see really big, strong walls. I would say it's hard to penetrate this castle.
Yeah, on top of a hill.
Yeah, on top of a hill, so really good hidden there by protected by nature. But in the end, this castle fell. And actually the reason why that was is because soldiers found in the end a vulnerability within the castle.
Yeah.
And actually it was because of the king said, okay, I want to have a toilet, right? Something human, right? We need to have it. But that's actually how the soldiers from the British were actually able to get into the castle and conquer it from the inside out.
They accessed the castle through the
royal
toilet.
Yeah. So it was a shitty job, but somebody had to do it. But that's how they get into it. And I think what really shows, as we show here, right, it's really important not to just build walls, right? Not just strong walls around it, but what's really important to know actually what are your assets, right? And also what are the risks. So what do you have in order to protect, right? Think about the data, the applications, the infrastructure, the network, the users, everything around it.
Yeah.
And from there on you can look like how important it's for a business, right? Think about the process to support your business, your revenue, making sure you put the right attention to protect it. Make sure it's able to run. Yeah.
Yeah.
And if we look at typical attacks, there's a lot of types of attacks, so maybe we can dive into that in a minute. But you mentioned you have to know your assets and all of your risks. We're looking here at some kind of an infrastructure.
Yeah.
And then somewhere in the bottom corner, there's an asset.
Actually, this meme is more about the supply chain attack, so we'll dive more a bit deeper into that and how you can mitigate these type of attacks. Yeah. But it's really cool. You actually see here like a whole infrastructure of a big corporate enterprise, but in the end, everything depends on this little piece there. This is in this case some guy in Nebraska, like maintaining some kind of sort code. Was actually vital in order to. For you to run your
has become vital over the years by building on top of the existing infrastructure.
And it's of course good when you know that you have this dependencies, right, on this specific code. Maybe you can help build them and make sure it works. But it's a risk, so you need to make sure that you're aware of it and how can you mitigate. But I think you know more about this example, right?
Well, it's an inherent problem that we have in IT because we never build something from scratch. We always reuse somebody else's code, or we use some dependency or a package or a library. Or we use an operating system which can do far more than we use it for. So it's an inherent problem that we don't always manage all the things that we're using in IT. Yeah. And one of a really prime example for a supply chain attack in this case was Xebia beginning this year, and we were really lucky that somebody caught that actually, because was actually a project for multiple years and by multiple developers also. So imagine the amount of money involved, and they believed it was probably a state actor for that. But it gives you an example.
Very briefly, what happened with this specific tool?
It was an open source repository, and it was used by Linux OSs, or distribution systems. And somebody found this by pure coincidence because an part of a process was running slower. And that's why he dived a little bit deeper. Yeah. And he caught wind of it and saw that they were masquerading code, and they created a backdoor. And if this would have been published within a general release, then we would have a lot of problems. Basically creating backdoors in certain Linux
would have been a global problem
for everybody, because every Linux or some Linux distributions use that exact process, and that shows us that we cannot control everything. Right. So it's an inherent problem that we have to deal with incidents, and that's
And this is then an incident, basically from inside, but we also have a lot of external actors attacking our systems. Something we hear a lot about are ransomware attacks. Yeah. Wilfred, can you tell us a bit how they typically what they look like?
Yes, of course. Yes. Next to knowing your assets, it's also nice to look from an attacker perspective to your environment, to cybersecurity. If you look at a typical ransomware attack, it starts with an initial access. Could be phishing, could be brute forcing a password or password guessing, or exploiting a vulnerability. The next phase, you're there for the lateral movement, trying to elevate your privileges to come to the right systems. And the next step, the action on objectives, is stealing data or maybe intellectual property, and eventually demand the ransom, encrypt all the systems. So if you're looking from a more attacker's perspective, it could help as well, knowing how could I protect myself against, for example, phishing, one of the attack techniques, against brute forcing passwords. So I think it's very practical to also look at cybersecurity from a more attacker perspective.
Yeah. And Jorge mentioned that it's really important to understand your assets and your risks. Yeah. But if you come to think about it, an organization has a lot of assets, so therefore also a multitude of risks. So how do you convert that into chocolate?
Good one. I think it all starts with a proper asset inventory, right? From your cloud resources, but also, as Wilfred shown, like your on-premise and the whole chain. That you leave the visibility, and from there start to dig like, okay, which one has what risks, how to mitigate them. Yeah. But if you don't know what you have, right, that's really hard.
What would be your approach, Wilfred?
Yeah, I think a good starting point is looking into the threat landscape. So you as an organization, there are several threat actors who could have interest in your company or your organization. There are different sort of threat actors. You have the general attacks, the semi-targeted attacks, targeted attacks, and the more sophisticated attacks from the nation states. Those are really hard to defend against, but it's a nice starting point to know what is the level of sophistication from my threat landscape.
What do we mean with nation states in this case?
Countries which has interests in your country, for example, more geopolitical interests. Right. And they mostly have more sophisticated tools. So it's harder to defend against.
And more patient, maybe.
Yeah, more money, more knowledge, more patient. Yeah, it's on the long run, indeed. So that's a good starting point. And furthermore, you also need to look at your prevention, detection, and response, your overall resilience level against the threat landscape you see on the left side. And there should be a fair balance between those pillars, I would say. Don't totally focus on prevention, because if an incident would happen, you would detect it in a too late stage. Your incident response processes are not up to speed. So it's very important to also have your pillars at the right level and balanced as well. And that determines the level of risk on the right side. You have a certain amount of risk controlled. You also have a certain risk appetite. Some companies tend to accept a lot of risks. some companies little risk, and the gap between controlled and your risk appetite, risk acceptance, and that's the gap you want to close. So utilize a certain mechanism or framework could make security easier for you.
Okay, and those type of frameworks we'll be addressing later on in this webinar. But one thing that caught my eye, and I also wanted to think about something Sven mentioned, that it's very difficult for organizations to have no risk exposure at all. There will also be incidents, things that might happen. Also the NIS2 directive that's focused on incidents as they have occurred and then mitigating them. And then in the middle I see assume breach. Jorge, that sounds interesting. You know, what do organizations need to do when they assume breach?
Yeah. Well, with assume breach, you're trying to have like a mind shift, right? Maybe you see like, hey, it might happen that they attack you. Well, actually, with assume breach, we're like, hey, it will happen. So how we're gonna defend against it, right? We cannot make it 100% secure, but how can we mitigate the impact of a hack, for example, right? Your data, the infrastructure, the lateral movement, as Wilfred mentioned. How can you prevent that and minimize that? So it's really a mind shift and looking at your infrastructure, the risks, like, hey, how can we, if this will happen, how can we minimize the impact instead of trying to stop it, because you'll never be able to do it 100%. Yeah.
Yeah. Well, it's interesting because you talked about risk appetite, right?
Yeah.
And if you put all your eggs in basket of prevention, then you will not cover everything because, well, you cannot circumvent everything, every security threat. But also, if you put everything in response, then you accept a lot of risk. So you have to decide where you pick and choose as an organization.
Yeah, it should be, I think, well balanced based on the threat actors, but also the full landscape. But at least being more active, right? Making sure that you keep an eye on it and don't let you surprised by the hackers in that case. Yeah.
So you need to be ready.
Yeah, because someone's always rattling your doorknob, as we see here, and that can be itchy. So rather be prepared.
This seems quite secure.
Yeah, well, I don't know.
And how do you deal with that?
Yeah, well, for example, here have an example of what we call threat modeling. That's actually where we look at the different application that a company has, for example, infrastructure, and we always start like, okay, we want, of course, mitigate threats, like ways how hackers could get in or steal data. But we first need to start like, what data or system do we have, right? So that's the identify assets. So from your network layer to how your developer work, how you deploy something on-premise or in the cloud. But then, as Wilfred mentioned, we're going to look like, okay, against who are we defending, right? So the threat actors could be script kiddies, APTs, right? Really the nation states, as we mentioned. But also criminals, because as we already discussed, this is really a good business. They have customer service, making sure that you're happy, right, when you're hacked. So that's really important. So threat actors, because it means how will you stack up your defense based on what you have. So when we identify the threats, like through the whole flow, how our data flows through our systems that we have, then we're going to think about how can we mitigate these threats, right? Sometimes you need to accept risk, maybe, depending on the impact on your business, or protect it, or maybe you need to have a managed provider that can help you to get these insights. At least make sure that you think about and know what you have and where are the risks and against who are you defending.
Yeah, and some risks you cannot prevent, and you have to accept the cost for it. And that can have various reasons why you, as an organization, are accepting it, would accept it.
And how is this in the cloud? We're talking about Google Cloud here as well. How do you handle the threat modeling there?
Yeah. Well, luckily Google also does a lot of threat modeling on their infrastructure. I always say this, the cloud is secure by default until you start deploying your workloads, right? Because if you create insecure workloads, you'll have the same issues compared to on-premise, but then on somebody else's infrastructure. But this is something, the threat modeling you do really on your own application. And once you deploy it to a cloud like Google Cloud, there you have a lot of great controls to keep it safe. And also, if you look from a design perspective, they have a lot of built-in by default security measures in order to protect your application.
Great. Then you mentioned the threat actors. I think we covered quite a few of them already. that are here, state sponsored. APT. What does that mean? APT.
Advanced persistent threats. I think Wilfred, you encounter them maybe a lot. I don't know if a daily basis, but
Yeah, those are the nation states
Yeah.
which have more time, are inside an environment for a long period of time. Usually harder to defend against the APTs than, for example, against script kiddies or cyber criminals. So it requires a higher level of resilience against those APTs, but it's also very hard to be resilient against.
Something you don't know, right?
APTs.
0 days. I think they use that a lot.
Exactly, they could utilize 0 days, so vulnerability that we don't know of yet. They could utilize that and be inside companies' networks. They are the highest level of attackers, I would say, within the threat landscape.
In the end, it will decide how much you have to invest in your security. That's why it's important to know your actors. If they're script kiddies, they just come by. It's like securing your house, your front door with a easy lock or with a strip on it, so no one can pick it. But you cannot 100%ly secure it, right? If the CIA comes in, they will come in at one point. So you have to know, okay, how much am I willing to invest for certain actors?
Great.
And for all of that, it helps to have some tools as an organization, and there's a lot of frameworks out there. We select one for this webinar to discuss, and that was the MITRE framework. Wilfred?
Yeah, so the MITRE attack framework is a framework which shows you all the steps an attacker takes to eventually get to his objectives. I think it's very complete, and it shows all the attack techniques that could be used, what we know of, in an attack. So it could help you with on the defense side, so to know what the attack techniques are, what the modus operandi could be of an attacker in a threat landscape. It's something which will come back in the end of the webinar as well. But it's a way to look at cybersecurity from a more attacker perspective.
It also gives you a head start, right? If you're trying to figure out, like with threat model, like, okay, what kind of gaps? You know, the MITRE attack framework really based on a lot of knowledge, what they see in the field and from other experts. So it can give you a head start, like how hackers try to get in on premise or in the cloud. Really get an understanding of that, how they move through the environment.
Is it like a set of guidelines, or are there also tools or platforms that support you with the implementation of this?
I think you see all sorts of platforms who implement the MITRE attack framework. You can also go to the website and see all the attack techniques that they have discovered, which could be used by attackers. So it's I think it's quite a familiar framework, which a lot of people know these days. And I'm happy about that because it makes it more tangible, I think.
Exactly. It's like a whole matrix. So then it depends, like, do you run on-premise, on cloud, SaaS? And then from there on what kind of phase, and then you can see, like, okay, what's their description, how could they get in, and then of course get a broader sense on how could you mitigate it. But it's of course also specific to, like, what protocol do you use or your application. But it really gives you already a head start to stay on par with the attackers in that sense.
You also use it in your daily practice?
Daily practice, wouldn't say at home, but at least professional, for sure. Yeah, it really helps in that sense.
Well, I know you have quite an advanced setup at home. So good, but there are a lot of security threats. So we covered a few of them, but there's a lot of actors with a lot of security threats, and we have a list of the top 5. Jorge, you want to pick a few?
Favorite the top 5 list actually are the security tests that we see at our customers, right? At the big enterprise customers that we help as Xebia. Well, we talk about misconfiguration, a lack of visibility, poor access management, secret management, and supply chain attack. We'll dive deeper into the supply chain attack in a moment. What we see a lot are the misconfigurations, right? So you have these standards with secure, in a secure way to set up your environment, cloud or on premise, and if a customer is not able to keep up with the standard or not implement it, just doing like how they used to, that really gives a foothold for attacker to get in, right? These misconfigurations. Think about open storage bucket, having VMs exposed that you're not aware of, or maybe it should not be, vulnerabilities. I mean, still you need to update it in the cloud, depending on the type of workload. If you use Kubernetes, even then you need to update the container, the cluster, the VM, so you still need to do a lot of work there. So I would say that's the number one that we see a lot.
Yeah. Okay.
The good thing is you can easily work on that because there are a lot of best practices, and also the cloud providers see a lot of feedback like, hey, try to do this in order to mitigate the risks. So that's a pretty interesting one. Yep. Number two, lack of visibility, because we talk about the assets that you need to know in order to determine the risks and how to mitigate it. Specifically with cloud, you see a lot of, with all the happy developers using things like infrastructure as a code, like Terraform, deploying, removing resources that move really fast.
Yeah.
And maybe back in the old days, you exposed or you exported all your assets to your CMDB, Topdesk or some other great tools there to see, oh, this is what I have today. But the targets move so fast within the cloud, so you need to have another way to look at it, right? To real real-time info, see where you are today when it comes to compliancy and the configurations. So yeah, that's actually number two. Yeah.
In the end, cloud gives you a lot of flexibility.
Yeah.
And it can lower your attack surface, but if you're not careful enough, then
It will increase, right?
you increase it.
Yeah.
And you mentioned the supply chain attack that you want to dive
exactly,
a bit deeper into that. Why is that? Why did you pick that one?
Oh, great question. Well, why supply chain check to dive a bit deeper into that one is because you see a lot of rise in attacks on that part, like the exit utils that Sven mentioned, Log4j, really popular one. That's also a reason to dive into that. So what we see here is actually, when we talk about supply chain attack, when you have an application, right, that you build as a company, it exists of a lot of components, right? The code that you wrote yourself.
Yeah.
Open source. As Sven mentioned, we love to reuse software. Open source really great.
Yeah.
From libraries to container images, but also infrastructure that lies underneath it. Think about your operating system. And what we actually want to do, so there's a lot of a big chain, right? What we have, what we use in our end products.
Yeah.
But if one of these components that you use have vulnerabilities, then your end product, the application that you run, could also have these issues, right? If you don't have the proper measures. Of course, we want to make sure that we're able to mitigate these risks, and then we try to look at it another way, like shift left security. We have one here. And that can help to mitigate supply chain attack, because what we try to do with shift left is make sure that we shift to the left, in this case the developer, where you, for example, get already feedback like, hey, the code that I'm currently creating, or the infrastructure as code, is it safe?
Yep.
Hey, this is a vulnerability or misconfiguration.
Yeah. So you introduce security earlier in the process.
Yeah, because then you minimize the impact, lower the cost, and you can fix it far more easier. And of course, you need to build the containers, that kind of stuff, test it, and then ship it to production.
Yeah.
So a lot of phases in between, as we see here. But the cool thing with shift left, you're trying to build in more controls at every step, and you get feedback into your pipeline. Think about your GitHub. Say, hey, these are the vulnerabilities. You can block it even there, but also on the cloud infrastructure itself, preventing it. Actually to reduce the error rates, but also the vulnerabilities. In the code or the application that you run there. Yep.
And hereby embedding security within multiple departments, because developers need to take their responsibility. So it's not only the security team that has the responsible of keeping your software secure or your company secure. We all have a part in that, and that's something you can use.
At the start of the webinar, Wilfred, you mentioned that one of the pain points is getting business interested in security. Does shift left also have something to do with that? Is business also a actor here?
Good question.
Or is this more for the tech teams?
I think it's a way of working more at in the operational part of security. But it might help.
It's more of a way of working that helps you during creating software in this case, and that's a really valuable insights. If you really have insights in your way of working and incorporate it in that. As the board of directors don't really care about this. No. They just want a safe piece of software that does not get hacked.
But they should care about these top 5 security threats.
They should care about the risks. But they won't care how you implement them.
Just fix it.
Just fix it. And what's the status on where you are, and that's the only thing that they need to know.
Clear. Then let's focus on the tech again. And we promised we would talk about Google Cloud also. So if you look at the Google Cloud services overview, what kind of services would you advise to mitigate these supply chain attacks?
We have a great slide here showing
That's
like
coincidence.
Yeah, nice. You knew what we want to say. So what you see on the slide are the Google Cloud services that can help you mitigate supply chain attack. So starting on the left, shifting left already. Yeah. We see things like Cloud Workstation. This is actually like a virtual environment where you can run your Visual Studio code, or at least your IDE, right, where you program your code. Why would you use that? You can mitigate the risk of the endpoint, so the laptop, the operating system, everything there, because you run it in the cloud through a browser.
Yeah.
Another one that's really cool is the assured open source software. We talked about like we love to reuse components, right, within the application we build, but these ones are curated by Google, scanned and hardened and maintained, so they keep an eye on the security of the specific components.
So Google also maintains these open source solutions, this open source software, or do they then ask the developers or the community to keep it up to standard?
Well, they have a different repository where they actually have like curated versions of it, and those you can pull from that registry and use in your environment. They don't support all of them, but for example, Go and Python language are supported, libraries there. Yeah. So that's really great. Then for cloud build, right, to build all our code that we have, because in the end we want to make sure we can create like a container, so we can run it on Cloud Run or Kubernetes. And then we see the artifact registry, because there we scan actually all the container images for vulnerabilities. You get given scores based on the vulnerabilities that are in there. Yeah. Based on that, we can actually say like, hey, we want to block the deployment of certain containers that have vulnerability X, Y, Z. For example, critical or high vulnerabilities. They can actually block the deployment towards the Kubernetes, and that's actually the part where it will reach the end user in the cloud resource. So with binary authorization, there you can check, hey, if this deployment has these vulnerabilities, then we actually want to block it. And that's pretty cool, because after that it will end up on the Kubernetes or the Cloud Run. Binary authorization is supported by Kubernetes and Cloud Run, so that's pretty cool. These are the serverless services within Google Cloud, and you can really make sure you can protect against supply chain attack and minimize the risk. I think that's the most important takeaway. Yeah.
Great. So that helps to assess the risks and find a solution in your supply chain.
Exactly. Yeah. So now you would say, right, guys, time to relax. I mean, we talked a lot of stuff, right? The assets, the risk.
Everything's covered, right? We have these cloud solutions. We shifted left.
Yeah. Well, talk about shifting. Actually, it's time to shift gears, because it's really, really important, right? Every second counts. You have a lot of information of all the resources. You need telemetry of all your systems. Monitor it to make sure you can stay on top of security. And I think that's what we see here, right? It's really a team effort, of course. DevOps teams.
You mentioned it's top sport already.
Yeah, it is really top sport, right? You cannot just fix it and then relax. Before you know, the new vulnerability or security threat is on the horizon. So that's why it's really important. It's a constant battle to make sure to be able to prevent risk that we're aware of. We say, okay, this we need to make sure we prevent it. Or we say, we accept the risk, but at least be aware of it. Need to be able to detect it and then respond. And I think Wilfred knows everything about the detection and response part of it.
Now we finally get to the framework.
I think we have it. Show it. Correct.
Yeah, now we're going back to the MITRE attack framework, which we like to use a lot, because it's from the attacker perspective. If you know what attackers are within your threat landscape, you might also know what their modus operandi is, so which attack techniques they use. You can actually plot that on the MITRE attack framework to see what techniques are used more than the others. So from a defensive perspective, you could focus first on those dominant used techniques to become more resilient in a very effective manner.
Yeah, because it's too small to read from the screen here.
Yeah,
of course. If you want to know more, you can go to attack.mitre.org and
absolutely, yeah. The moral of the story is that there once was a Japanese samurai who said, "Know your enemy, know his sword," and if you know that, you can very effectively defend yourself against the attacker.
Yeah, I love it that actually defense evasion. That's actually the biggest one. So that's where attacks are really interested in. Yeah,
absolutely. Yeah. Yeah. And prevention is super important, but also having visibility. So the detection side of security. What you see here is also the MITRE-ATT&CK phases from reconnaissance to impact. You actually need different detection technologies to have full visibility on the whole attack chain, full visibility on your environment. So it's always a combination of endpoint monitoring, logs, but also placing honeypots in certain places within your environment. But could also be network logs which you monitor. So it's always a combination of a lot of technologies which combined give you visibility on the attack chain.
What does a honeypot do?
Good question as well. It fakes like a certain system. So you have a normal file server, for example. You can also make a honeypot, which is also a file server, but it's one with a lot of vulnerabilities. And we are closely monitoring such a honeypot to see if there would be an attacker in the network. We just
go to that honeypot.
Exactly, and that would indicate, there might be an attack going on within the network. There could be an attacker in the network. And then we do analysis, check with the customer, like, hey, someone is at the honeypot trying to exit. To exit it indeed, yeah. So it's a combination of multiple technologies. Don't rely on solely one monitoring technology.
I love the honeypots because it feels like putting out cheese for the hackers there. They attacked it and then learn from it what they do, and in the end see how can we defend against it. Love it.
Yeah, it's very cost effective. Security operations, security operating center. There's a lot. You want to connect a lot of data sources to your SIEM. The SIEM is where all the log data is stored. And what I said, don't rely on one detection technology. You have the EDR, you have cloud logs, you have the Active Directory logs, you have your honeypots. So there are multiple data sources you could connect to your SIEM, preferably as much as possible, because it gives you more visibility. What you also do is utilizing a SOAR to automate response as well. So don't only stop when you have detected something, you also want to auto-respond to certain attacks.
So in your introduction you mentioned the SOC, so we covered that already. Now we have the SIEM and the SOAR. You need to elaborate on the meaning of those.
SOAR is a security orchestration and automation response tool, I would say, where you orchestrate a lot of information about a certain alert, and where you make automated response playbooks, so to say, to also directly respond to a certain incident. A SIEM is a security incident and event management system, which is a big storage unit for all the cloud, for all the logging you're sending to the SIEM. And what's also very important here is the threat intelligence part. So when you have connected all the log sources to your SIEM, you also need to do something with the data.
Right.
So you have to write detection logic, rules, that would trigger an alert if certain behavior is seen in the SIEM. So threat intelligence, knowing what attackers there are and what the modus operandi is they use, is very important as well to develop detection logic.
That kind of logic, is that what a security engineer writes also?
Well, in the end, why we have this really complicated diagram is we want to create context to problems. So if the file was downloaded from a dubious country, could be just a road warrior that is now working from that dubious company in order to view a file, but you have to have that context somehow, and that's why you need to have different log sources and such to create that, and then respond accordingly, because else you might interfere with a valid business process.
And coming back to the questions, engineers can also help, of course, building you this for Xebia or Hunt and Hack It, specifically also on Google Cloud, on Google Cloud Chronicle. And I think what's also really great feature is the SOAR, right? We also have that with part of Chronicle. Think about we have the EDR, that's the endpoint detection response, like the old school antivirus, for example, on your laptop.
Right.
And if there's something happens, then the SOAR can help you with the playbook on automating, like isolating one of the computers from the rest of the network. And then also creating, like we see the ticket system, like create a Jira ticket, like, hey, this is something that happened, this is something that's been done. So really automating it so that you can respond really fast on attacks and isolate the risk, actually.
Yeah, and with regards to the detection logic, you can only write detection rules if you know a certain behavior is used by an attacker. And it's mostly on the live log data you receive in a SIEM where you can write the rules for. But there could be a 0-day become a known vulnerability, and you also want to do a retrospective analysis on has this happened in the past within our systems. And that's where the threat hunts become in place. You can use a threat hunt to do such a retrospective analysis if certain behavior has happened in the past. So it's quite also quite important for the quality of a service to have good detection logic in place next to connecting as much log sources as possible.
Yeah. So the MITRE framework very useful for organizations to get to grips with everything that's happening with regard to security for their organization.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, and then you might say, do you want to...
I feel a butt coming.
Send everything you have to the SIEM? Ideally, yes.
Yeah.
Because it would be very helpful when you have to perform a forensic analysis to have as much log data as possible. But it also has a cost aspect. It depends on the pricing model of the SIEM you're utilizing. For example, Chronicle is using a different pricing model than, for example, Microsoft, more ingestion-based. And Chronicle more per head of the organization. So ideally you want to have all the log data, but it comes with costs. So you have to choose what data is the most important generally.
Yeah, and then when you talk about cost, then the business folks get they get interested again. What's the cost?
They are super interested.
Yeah.
Also for forensic purposes, which is on the next slide. If you have a lot of log data, it's easier to do your forensic analysis when an incident has happened. Also with regards to retention of data, if you only have a month of data and the attacker is already in your systems for like multiple months, you can't do a proper investigation, proper forensic investigation. And like in the beginning, we looked at the NIST requirements. You have to deliver a report within a month. And if you don't have certain data, you can't really do a full root cause analysis, for example. So also the retention is very important, and ideally it would be 12 months.
Yeah, I think great to add that Google Cloud, the Chronicle SIEM source solution, they get by default 12 months hot data retention. So they really look at the time of the retention, and you pay there per user. And that's pretty cool compared to the ingestion based. Yeah.
Great.
Yeah. And this is more my outro slide. So we talked about that security can be painful, and we don't want it to be painful. And one of the things that can make security painful is solely focus on prevention, or too much focus on prevention. And what I'm trying to show is don't solely focus on prevention, also on detection and response. With focusing on prevention, you're lowering the likelihood of an incident, but you're not doing much about the impact. So you also want to mitigate impact by detect an incident in an early stage, and knowing how to respond to an incident, have the processes in place. So please don't only focus on prevention. That's what I have seen a lot in the past. There was a very large focus on prevention, but it should be more fair balance between prevention, detection, and response.
That's a great wrap up. And looking across the table, Sven, for you, any final remarks?
Yeah, well, we already covered NIS2 a little bit, and one of the key points for NIS2 is to boost your cyber resilience. And although the accountability for the board of directors, the costs and fines are not something that you want, but shouldn't be your incentive to start with that, because cyber resilience is something you have to start anyway. I think we can all agree on that. But in the end, you want to make sure that the cybersecurity risks can be connected to certain value streams within your company, right? That the board of directors know, okay, this business process is relying on this IT system, and these are the risks involved, and people are working on to mitigate the risks. So, and the other way around as well, the engineers also work on certain cybersecurity technologies, and they know why they're doing it, because they're protecting certain business values. And that's something that is right up in our alley. We can start such initiative, we can guide them, but we can also build them for you and implement, as Jorge already mentioned, in Google Cloud, for instance, but also other clouds as well.
Thank you, Jorge.
Nice.
Final words.
Well, I think when a great addition to what these guys already mentioned, I think we also talked about threat modeling. Some people say like, hey Jorge, threat modeling looks really complicated. Do I need to start threat modeling tomorrow like my whole application? What I then would love to say is like, look at the changes that you do. Like if you're going to do some new change on your application, try to threat model that, look at the risk there, how you can mitigate them, and then move on slowly, because you don't want to be that security, don't need to be painful, right? Start small, at least try to understand it and work on it, baby steps, in order to increase your security level. I think that would be my takeaway. Yeah.
Thank you for that. And guys, thanks for sharing your insights. And with that, we get to the end of this webinar, where we covered a lot of topics. We looked at the threat actors, the most common threats. We looked at NIS2 legislation, the directive coming up, the MITRE attack framework, supply chain attacks, a lot of anecdotes. So thanks a lot for sharing. This was wonderful. Thanks everyone for watching, and we'd like to end with a short video that introduces a YouTube series.
Yeah.
One of your favorites,
One of
Jorge?
favorites, yeah, the Google Cloud hacking, or hacking Google Cloud, or hacking Google in that sense.
Yeah.
Google was hacked back then around Christmas. We think about it was a state actor.
Yeah.
So they created a 6-series episode, really cool, great way how they explain it, about hacking, what they learned from it, and how can you protect against it. It's a great series to watch.
Yeah. All right. So
yeah.
if you're interested in that, we'll end this webinar with the teaser of that series. If you want to know more, just look it up on YouTube.
Yep. Thank you very much.
With that, from the studio, we sign off. Thank you.
Thank
you
you, Walter,
very
for
much.
directing us.
We detected a highly infrastructure.
I didn't used to think that a foreign military would come after us, and now they obviously are.
This was something that we'd never seen before.
A new kind of problem. It's not just country versus country. All of us are somewhat on these front lines.
It's their job, 24/7, to try to break into places like Google.
Hope is not a strategy. You need a team of professionals with exactly the right knowledge and expertise.
It's mildly ominous.
To do the kind of work we do, you need to cherry pick the best of the best.
I might qualify it by saying I'm an ethical hacker, but yes, I'd say I'm a hacker.
Definitely consider myself a hacker.
Hacker.
I wear mostly hoodies for some reason.
This is very serious.
The attacker's after something, and you want to find out what they're after.
The attack happens over Christmas.
Santa may arrive late this year.
Someone is always rattling your doorknob to see if it's unlocked.
We're constantly testing our products.
Car companies crash their cars to make sure they're safe. So do we.
So much more is at stake now.
Human rights.
Privacy, professional life, personal life.
The entire ecosystem around an election.
It's not just securing Google, it's securing the internet.
I'm in this battle because I believe we can win.
Hunt them down, contain them, and then boot them out.
Burn it down.
If any attackers try to get in, I want them to have a very bad day.